Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we have an early impression video. Well, I'm calling it an early impression because I've only had a chance to wear it 3 times. Full wears though. I wore it Friday, Saturday, and now Sunday as my scent of the day. And it is the new fragrance from the house of Sherwood Parfums, and this is called Artemis. Now, let me show you the new packaging. He's got some new packaging for Artemis. I actually cut it, I think, as I was opening the box, so that's not his fault. That cut is mine. But here's sort of the packaging. It comes with this little sleeve. I'm usually not big into packaging, but I like what he's done here. It's very modern with the group. A lot of people are doing this Roja style packaging, I guess, with the box, and it's got the little silk that it sits in and all that stuff. It's a good presentation. It could probably be maybe a little bit heavier. You could argue it's a little bit flimsy, but the packaging is good. It's solid, and it keeps the bottle sitting nicely. This was 30 mils for $300, if I'm not mistaken, and I think it might be sold out. So I literally just received the package a couple days ago. Not very much time to do a review of something this sort of, I would say there are a lot of moving parts to this fragrance and a lot of notes, and we'll talk about some of those. But there's the color of the juice. You can see the dent I put in the bottle. I've worn it as my scent of the day multiple days, 3 days in a row now. It is a pure parfum. And on the back, he's got his signature and 45 out of 60, excuse me. He's doing 60 bottles now. So I think he needs to up that. But anyways, that's a story for another time. So let's talk a little bit about the name Artemis. So for those of you who don't know, Artemis is a Greek goddess, and she was the goddess of wild animals, the hunt, vegetation, chastity, childbirth. She was identified by the Romans as Diana. So the Romans had their version of the Greek goddesses, if you will, because they had to have their own thing, of course. But Artemis was kind of the daughter of Zeus and Leto, and the twin sister of Apollo. She's one of the most famous goddesses. And she was known for her character and what she stood for, the forest. She's often seen sort of with a bow and arrow and stuff like that. She was sort of lays in all these different forms, goddesses, wild nature, dancing in the mountains and forest and marshes. You get the idea, right? And that is actually a really good name for the fragrance, I will say. Here, I'll give you a brief write-up by Prakar on kind of his thought process with connecting the name Artemis with the fragrance, okay? So, in a forest cradled between towering mountains, the goddess Artemis ruled over a mystical woodland, where the air was alive with the scent of wild herbs and blossoms, an embodiment of beauty and strength, much like the goddess herself. So obviously, we are thinking forests and hunting, and there is this interesting interplay between the very animalic opening, which it is, and we'll talk a little bit about that, and almost like something intense, very real and intense and in your face, something you just cannot get away from kind of thing. And just imagine like, Artemis killing a deer with her bow and arrow or something like that, watching it die, putting your hand inside of the deer to gut it, feeling its blood on your hands, and then looking up from that very intense emotional connection that you have with the animal that you basically killed for meat, sustenance, whatever it is, fur, wool, and realizing there is this beautiful, soft, gentle balance at play in the forest. That's Artemis to me. Artemis is kind of both sides of that coin. So there's moments of the extreme, adrenaline pumping in your face, kind of, like I said, maybe the ugly side of life. And then there's counterbalanced, with this feeling like you just want to sit down and meditate, listen to the birds chirp, listen to the ants go about their never-ending daily routines that they never complain about, they just do, that kind of thing, and just seeing yourself as part of that cycle, and that's kind of the contrast with Artemis, okay? Let me read you the unbelievable note listing in this, and I've often said that, you get amazing value for money with Sherwood. Now, the prices have gone up from some of his very early offerings. He released things like Gentleman, there were a couple other fragrances that I reviewed on the channel, which we'll talk about, like Paradise, which sold for under $100. And value for money for those was really through the roof. I wish he would do maybe some more fragrances in that price range again. It seems like everything is now $300. But still, for what you get, $300 is a lot more value for money than a lot of the NSARs, which I saw some NSARs selling for like 15 grand for a bottle recently. Pure and utter insanity. But so let me read you the insane note listing on Artemis just to give you an idea of kind of value for money when I say like complexity and materials and stuff like that. So you have Australian Baronia Absolute, blackcurrant, Calabrian bergamot, Egyptian geranium, grapefruit zest, green apple, juniper, Kashmiri lavender, May rose absolute, orange blossom absolute, rosemary, Siberian musk, and Tunisian neroli. That is the top. The heart is Bulgarian lavender absolute, clary sage absolute, Ethiopian civet, French iris, jasmine grandiflorum absolute, lily of the valley, May rose, Mediterranean cypress, Mexican sweet acacia absolute, Russian castoreum, Thai oud, tuberose absolute, and violet leaf absolute. That is the heart. The base is ambergris, Assam oud, Bourbon vanilla, Indonesian patchouli, Java vetiver, oak moss absolute, Omani frankincense absolute, Spanish labdanum absolute, and Texas cedar. So it's like, wow. That is a hell of a note listing right there, boys and girls. So I would say when you first apply, and I applied about an hour or two ago, so I'm not going to do a fresh spray. But when you first apply, this is probably, Artemis to me is probably one of my favorite openings of the recent releases since Ambrosia, okay? So, you know, you think about like things like Chrysos and Poseidon and stuff like that. I really prefer the opening of Artemis. I love the way that it opens up with this very oily, you know, I think the rosemary adds a little bit of oiliness to it. There's this oily, woody, animalic fertilizer notes that hit you right from the beginning, slightly fecal, decomposing, you know, you think of decomposing animals that die in the forest and stuff like that. Now, depending on how much experience you have with oud, you will either love or hate this opening. I will tell you a very funny story. I wore it on Friday, as the very first time I wore it as my scent of the day. And I was bringing my daughter to school. And it was the morning, and I said, baby, I want you to smell Daddy's perfume today. And I let her smell it, and she goes, oh my God, that is disgusting, Daddy. You need to go take a shower. Now, granted, she's 5 years old. I said, I just got out of the shower, baby. I just put my fragrance on. I really like it. You don't like that? She goes, no, it's disgusting. But it gave me a chuckle. If you have no experience with fragrances, which she actually does have some experience with fragrances because she smells them on me all the time, but obviously the opening was too much for her. It is a very animalic opening. You may think it's way too much, or you could be like me where you're like, give me more, baby. But basically it smells like some sort of blend of some of his previous releases blended into something new. Okay, that's the way that I would describe it. There's a quote that I got to thinking of while wearing this. It's attributed to George Orwell, I believe. And he basically said, what do you have in common with the picture of the child on the mantle that you used to be? And the answer is nothing, except you happen to be the same person. You know, everything has changed for you. You're the same person, but you have nothing in common with that 5-year-old child, right? That you used to be. And that's the quote that kind of perfectly sums up this fragrance for me, Artemis. This really shows, I think, the growth of Prakar as a perfumer. But if you know some of his previous releases, okay, what does it have in common with the previous releases? Well, it's the same perfumer. You can clearly see the same DNA in here, but everything has changed. You know, it's like the child who is now an adult. But if you could imagine him sort of taking his DNA, that Sherwood DNA, amping up the oud and animalics to probably one of his most aggressive openings since something like Ambrosia, or maybe even going back to something like I mentioned he did an oud fragrance, which I really, really want. And now all of a sudden, of course, I'm blanking on it. That's going to drive me insane. I have to remember what it's called. Hang on. He did an oud fragrance that was called Paradise. Paradise, if you said, Ramsey, you can have one Sherwood fragrance, you don't have a full bottle, it would be Paradise. I love the aggressive animalic oud opening in Paradise, and you get some of that in Artemis. This is probably one of his most heaviest oud feeling fragrances since Paradise, okay? It definitely gives you that animalic sort of hit right from the beginning, in my opinion, from my sort of way of looking at things, okay? If you can just imagine this being in sort of his ballpark with that very aggressive opening using the Sherwood DNA, you would get in the ballpark of Artemis, okay? So very quickly what ends up happening is this fermented animalic opening starts to subside. So it hits you, I mean, like a punch to the gut from the very beginning. It only lasts a minute or two, though, before all these other notes start to like gang up on it, and everything starts to happen very, very quickly with Artemis. That's one of the things, is that as the minutes tick by, the animalic parts of the opening does this. You know, it does the airplane landing, if you will. And the trajectory of the animalics go less and less and less and less as the opening really starts to progress, as the minutes start to fly by. And if I had one complaint about Artemis, I would say the transitions happen so quickly, and it's almost like light speed. You know, everything starts happening so fast in Artemis. Like the goddess Artemis just morphed from one side of the forest to the other. And the fragrance doesn't last as long as I had hoped. That something that starts off this strong and powerful, you know, I was really hoping that it would be a beast and last 12 hours. Now, I would say I've been reapplying this every 5 hours or so when I wear it, so you can see the dent that I've made in it. Because I love that opening. I want to re-experience the first hour or two. Now I'm hoping as air gets into the bottle, it'll strengthen, and you know, the dry down will start to change and be stronger. But man, I love those first couple hours. It is just brilliant. And so the animalic aspects to this, basically what ends up happening is they start to slip, you know, like a mask falling from someone's face, and you can kind of see what's underneath. What's interesting about Artemis is what's underneath is beautiful. And next come, after the animalic, oody, challenging type opening, you're left with this herbaceous, spicy, green, foresty, fruit, slightly fruity even. Maybe these fruity notes start to appear, and it's interesting because everything happens so fast. This is kind of the progression as you're wearing it. You go, was that a fruity note I just smelled? And then like a minute or two later, you're like, oh yeah, it's absolutely a fruity note. Because then you're hit with the hardcore fruity note that the progression just continues on. This fragrance just rolls on. And then you're like, okay, there's the fruity note, and it's on to something else. I mean, Artemis is literally moving on to something else. Once you really put your finger on one aspect of it, it moves on. Very, very tough fragrance to review. So as the mask sort of slips further, you're like, yep, that was definitely something fruity. At first, you're like, was it? And then yep, definitely, and then it's gone. You know, that's the progression of the scent. And so everything happens so fast. I can guess where some of these touches come from, you know, from looking at the note listing and just sort of my experience over the time. But honestly, it would be only speculation if I did that. I will say Baronia Absolute is a very expensive floral note that you get in the top. Most people are not even aware of Baronia. Russian Adam used it in his Oud Taiwan, if I'm not mistaken. And it adds this herbaceous, spicy, fruity aspect, exactly what I was talking about earlier. But pretty soon, the more the animalic mask continues to slip, the more you realize the fragrance starts to exude those exact properties, you know? The oud note in the top that was prominent by the first 30 minutes now turns more into this, I would almost say like this antique furniture-like smell, okay? With hints of very high class, very professional lavender and fruits. If you've smelled things like Paradise, you'll know that very professional lavender that Prakar likes to use. He actually sent me some. This is Bulgarian Lavender Absolute, which is used in this, I believe. It's in the heart. This is the exact Bulgarian Lavender Absolute that's in the heart, I bet. And he really likes using lavender in his fragrances. You notice he uses Kashmiri lavender in the top, and then Bulgarian Lavender Absolute in the heart, okay? And so very high class, very professional. And there are some citrus notes in the opening. Once that hardcore animalic, you know, oud and Ethiopian civet and castoreum and ambergris feel, that all just seems to kind of come together, slip a little bit, you realize, okay, there is a little bit of citruses in here. There's some grapefruit zest, which adds just a little bit of this very tart, sort of sour aspect. The oud also can come across as slightly sour. And what I love about Prakar's work is it starts to smell like some of the very high-end NSARs, you know, the ones where he like replaces ambergris with, or replaces perfumer's alcohol with ambergris tincture and stuff like that. There is that sparkle of ambergris. And I don't know what percent ambergris or oud is used in here, but I would guess you're getting a pretty hefty dose, you know? The first 30 minutes or so, you will disproportionately smell the ambergris, the oud, the castoreum, the civet, The sour civet paste-like smell. All of that is there from the beginning. And then what ends up happening is, as the fruity opening starts to kind of slip by, as the green apple and black currant, which, by the way, the black currant in Artemis is brilliant. It's so natural. It reminds me a little bit of the way that the black currant smells in the House of Jinx. There's a fragrance that I'm going to review very soon called Rojo by Jinx. It's the Portuguese word for purple. And the thing about Rojo is the whole fragrance is purple. Everything about it is purple. Whereas with Artemis, it's just kind of the black currant that if you could just isolate that black currant note and pull it out of Artemis, you would kind of get the way that this very berried, sort of like a berry wine, it smells like a berried wine. You get that fresh, natural feeling of like black currant on the vine, and you get some of that in Artemis. But like I said, Rojo is all about purple. Everything is purple. The orris root, everything that is used in here is meant to portray the color purple. And so, like I said, in Artemis, it's just kind of that black currant. But if you can isolate that note, it's like a flashbang of natural, like you're in the forest and all of a sudden you come across this black currant plant, and you pick a berry, you smell it or something, you move on, you're on to the next thing. As I said, this fragrance is all about, you have to think of this fragrance as being in a constant state of flux. It's really impossible to understand Artemis without understanding that constant state of flux. It's almost like a train always moving on the track, or Artemis, like the goddess, constantly kind of slipping through the forest. And there's this constant evolution to Artemis. And that's one of the reasons why I think it makes it so difficult to put your finger on, especially after only 3 wears. I really feel like this is one of those fragrances you could wear for a year or two and still say, I don't really understand it fully, because it shows more things to you over and over again. So I love the fresh aspect of the blackcurrant berries with that hint of purple wine aroma mixing in with the apple. It gives it that little bit of fruitiness on top, and it blends beautifully with the Thai oud. Thai oud naturally has its own fruity aspect, sometimes nectarine-like, plum-like, berry-like, and then what starts to happen is the fragrance begins to almost take a shift. So it opens up with that really hardcore animalic. Some people would say it's disgusting. I love it. As I said, it depends on where you are in your journey. But that very hardcore animalic opening starts to shift to something that turns more floral, more powdery, more fresh all of a sudden. And then what starts to come in is this real Siberian deer musk. And so this fragrance basically has the trifecta as far as like animalic notes go, because it has multiple types of oud. It has Thai oud, which I said is usually the more fruity type of oud. Sometimes it can have that balloon-like smell. And then it has Assam oud, which is more of this fermented animalic sort of barnyard oud. It has real ambergris, and real deer musk, from my understanding. I think the Siberian deer musk in here is real. So it has the trifecta. But the musk here doesn't represent... So when I think of the way that the powdery notes start to come in, I don't think about that animalic opening. I don't put the musk in there with the oud, castoreum, civet, paste, hardcore animalic opening. I put the musk more in with the softer, gentler, floral parts. And so it represents not the adrenaline rush of like shooting the deer with the arrow and killing it, but more of the peaceful, serene, powdery aspect of just seeing the deer in the forest, Maybe there's a family of deer from drinking from the spring, just enjoying the peaceful day, and you're just part of that ecosystem, looking at it with a smile, That's the side that the musk starts to come in. A little bit furry, but very, very calm, very, very relaxed, like you don't want to move because you don't want to disturb the deer kind of thing. So, uno momento, while I give Fiji a shout out. Excuse me. Okay, so there are many notes that I really feel like 3 full wears is just not enough to do a review of this, something so complex, but I'm giving it my best shot. So, I have more fragrances to review on the channel, so it's just kind of one of those things, you gotta do what you gotta do. Sometimes I wish I had months and months to sit down and break this fragrance down. But if you're familiar with some of Prakar's previous works, some of his previous releases that I've discussed about on the channel, you know he loves using that lavender, as I said, and lavender adds this very gentlemanly, herbal, refined, floral smell. The sour, dirty, animalic aspects kind of give way to this floral bouquet, which basically, it's really impossible in my mind anyway to separate all of the notes in the floral aspect when they really start to come in. It's like seeing the entire forest instead of just seeing bits and pieces like the flowers, the trees, the weeds, the branches, the leaves. The animals, obviously you could take each one in isolation, but if you see it as a whole, you see it as the forest, right? And that's kind of what this combination of floral notes does to me. You know, you get the iris, you get the jasmine, you get tuberose, and you get this very floral, herbal lavender. You get the Kashmiri lavender mixed with this Bulgarian lavender absolute. And it's almost like the elegant, sort of more classy notes strangely start to appear all of a sudden. And it's such a drastic shift from that opening. There's a huge shift from the opening to what the fragrance basically turns into. This is a great example of kind of one of those fragrances that you cannot judge a book by its cover, or judge a fragrance by first sniff, if you will. If you're one of those people, who smells a fragrance and is like, nope, not for me, or yes for me, this one would really throw you for a loop. So as it dries down, I would say more of those classical notes start to emerge. They start to take center stage. The heart is all about florals, which feel delicate and aloof and temporary, you know, because as more florals start to take the stage, what my brain really starts to focus on somehow is almost like, this is something that hit me yesterday while I was wearing it. So only the second time, but I've been trying to focus on it today because it's almost like as the fragrance changes, you're witnessing the changes in the seasons inside of the forest. So it isn't just like a snapshot in time of a forest where everything is in bloom and perfectly green and the bees are buzzing and all that stuff, you know. Strangely, there is a little bit of this honeyed floral type smell that starts to come through. But some of these floral notes, like I think the Mexican acacia that was used here, Mexican sweet acacia absolute to be specific, I think they sort of give off this sort of like forest in cycle, you know, like seasons inside of the forest where the plants aren't getting enough water and everything starts to turn a little bit dry, straw-like honey, like you can snap the flower stems because they're not getting enough water. Different plants are taking their place. You know, there's this different fauna growing, and there's this ecosystem in place that's going on, and yet the forest endures. Everything changes. Maybe they're not getting enough water, maybe their plants over here aren't getting enough sunlight, but the forest just sort of adapts and endures, you know. And that's, I think, the beauty of Artemis, is it's this kaleidoscope. You can kind of see throughout and have this introspection and thought about your place in the forest. Where do you fit in? Are you the hunter at this point in time because you have to eat, you know, or are you the gentle observer with kind of the smile on your face and just appreciating the beauty of nature? And so what ends up happening late into the dry down is vetiver and oak moss build up this beautiful forest floor-like feel with the Texas cedar, and there's this slightly smoky, earthy patchouli that kicks in. And it gives you this feeling of being grounded, you know, on the forest floor, like your feet are in the ground, you're grounded. Gravity kind of pulls you to the place that you are, and you can just kind of appreciate how the forest changes. I will say, I'm really hopeful as more air gets into the bottle that it will open up more, that it will last longer, that it won't sit so close to the skin as you get into the 3, 4, 5 hour mark. But man, I mean, that would just be the cherry on top because I love the opening of this. My only other beef is, Prakar, I think it's time for you to start doing 100 bottles instead of 60. You know, I know it was 50 originally with Ambrosia. Now it's 60. And it's time to go to 100, man. There are enough people in the world now who want your work. And I cannot wait for you to get your website up either, as you promised us by the end of the year. So hopefully, even if it's not by the end of the year, hopefully you have it up soon, because once your website is up, I really feel like you're going to blow up even further. Because, you know, you're really doing something special here. I think it's just a fact people have a hard time getting a hold of you, or I think they would sell out first day, like some of Russian Adam stuff from back in the day. But still, selling out for a week or two tells, when it's only a week or two out and it's already sold out, it tells me it's time to do bigger batches, my brother. So anyways, thank you very much for sending this my way. I really appreciate getting to know Artemis. I believe it's officially sold out, but if not, I think he basically said that he wouldn't hold bottles for people who haven't paid. So even if they said, hold me a bottle, if they haven't paid and you write him and say, hey, I want a bottle and I'm ready to pay you right now, I'm pretty sure he will sell you the bottle. That's my understanding of it. But you might want to reach out to him on Instagram. Sherwood Parfums is his IG name. I'll also leave his email in the description if I remember. But anyways, let me know what you think of the house if you had a chance to try it, of Artemis. As always, it's a pleasure doing these type of reviews. These are the type of things that I want to do, the stuff that really no one else is doing, or not many people are doing this kind of content. I shouldn't say no one, but not many people are. So it's an honor and a pleasure. As always, cheers, guys. Thank you for getting us to 11,000 subscribers. Go watch my 11,000 subscriber celebration yesterday if you missed it. Thanks for being here with us. I love you guys. Cheers. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.